This is the Blaze and Axis podcast, amplifying disability perspective one story at a time. I'm Blaze Bryant, as we're sitting here in my downstairs guest studio, which is code for around the dining room table. And the laugh that you just heard is, of course, my guest on this third part of our Black History Month series, a very dear friend and mentor to me, Cliff Perez, the systems advocate at the Independent Living Center of the Hudson Valley in Troy, New York. Cliff has a laundry list of accomplishments that we'll hit on as we go through this. And Cliff, always good to chat with you, my friend. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, of course, Blaze. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, and to the theme of mentoring, I want to quickly tell the story of how we first met.
Are you sure you want to do that?
I'm absolutely positive I want to do that. I was hired in 2022, September of 2022, to be a peer advocate, youth transition specialist at the Independent Living Center. I knew damn near nothing about independent living. And this guy walks up to me and he goes, "You must be the new youth person." Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, who's this old crotchety guy? And
Watch out with the crotchety part.
Well, I'm just saying, that was my first thought. And he goes, "Well, hello, new person. Hi, I'm Blaze. I'm Cliff. Great, nice to meet you." He goes, "So you're the new youth person, right?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, that's good, because everyone else around here is old as you know what." And I just knew, Cliff, right then and there, you were going to be a very important person in my, at least, working life at ILCHV. Little did I know at the time that we were going to be, that we were going to have the friendship that we have and the mentorship that you've provided me. So,
well, that's nice to hear, my friend.
Yeah. All right. Now that we got all the niceties out of it, how did you get involved in the disability rights movement?
Wow, what a loaded question.
I know.
And I was thinking about this, obviously, since I knew I was going to do this. And I thought about this before because it's like the fundamental question to ask, I think, any disability right advocate, I think. And I think, I've heard stories of other people, and a lot of people have like some significant moment in their life. You see this in movies and you read this in stories. That may be clear. I'm not sure I had that. I was thinking about, did I have a significant moment where I went, ooh? Yeah, I don't think so. But at least not on disability rights. I think overall, my thing is, like, I have a thing against injustice.
For sure.
And that did develop early, but it wasn't on disability. In fact, the very first thing that hit me about injustice was the way we treated women, actually. As a teenager, I remember, things are so strange in this universe. Some things don't seem to connect at all. So I was watching this PBS show on a woman giving birth. God only knows why, but it fascinated me to see this.
It's because there were 3 channels and the other 2 just had nothing else on.
Yeah, that could possibly have been it. But so I'm watching this and I was extremely fascinated by this whole process and how wonderful it looked, just bringing in life into this world. And then I started thinking about, just in general, about how women are treated. And I was looking around, and it just affected me very deeply. And from that point on, I paid a lot more attention to things that I considered to be issues of injustice, where people were being treated completely unfairly, not because life is unfair, because life is, and that's okay. But there's no need for another person to consciously be unfair and mean to another person. So that became a lot more up to the forefront of my mind after that. And then after that, it was just an issue of the fact that I knew that I had always been discriminated against. I was discriminated against because of the color of my skin. I was discriminated against because I was blind. And who knows what else? Maybe because I was raised in Puerto Rico. So when I came to the United States, I didn't speak any English. We discriminate against people for a variety of stupid, superficial reasons. And I learned that quickly.
Yeah, we still do.
Exactly. So then I thought about, if I was going to go to college and what was I going to do. And I had no idea what I was going to do because basically I didn't learn anything in high school. Right? I mean, I went to an institution for the blind. And I think that their idea was that blind people were just going to be Stevie Wonders and Ray Charles. And I grew up learning piano and music therapy and music this and music that. And it was, it was wonderful from the point of view of loving music, but it's not wonderful from me from the perspective of that I had to. I don't like being told that I have to do anything, whether I like it or not. Don't tell me I have to do it. And that's the way it was in the Institute. We all had to learn music. That was supposed to be our thing. And we would listen to sound. I remember our school bought one of the very first stereos so we could listen to bird calls in stereo and listen to other sound effects because, that's what blind people do. So that's what I grew up with. I mean, I had in the biology regions of my school, I had a 59. That was the highest grade. That's how bad it was. My SATs combined were less than 700. If you know anything about SATs, they begin at 200. Okay. So not very good in that sense. So I didn't think I was going to make it in college, but I did go to college. I was fortunate enough to do that. Things kicked in then. I excelled. I made dean's list. I was the first blind person in the varsity track team, and I was a sports photographer for the school newspaper. And then from there, I went to Stony Brook, got my master's degree. In the meantime, I had met the person that I always thought I would meet, which is my lovey Mickey Perez. Now Perez, that is Mickey Ruiz at the time. Micaela is actually her name. And so by the time I went to Stony Brook for my master's degree, Ganima, our first child, had been born. So then I got my social work degree, moved back up here to the, Capital District area and saw some jobs, started looking for work and saw some jobs related to disability. And when I saw that, this whole injustice thing kicked me again, well, I'm a social worker. This is what I went to school for. And so I applied for a job. The first job I applied for was a job that Pat Figueroa got. It was a newly developed program, the Client Assistance Program, which I believe was established in 1984. And I started working in 85. And so I had applied for that position. It was a statewide coordinator of the program. So I didn't get that. I didn't have the experience for that. Pat Figueroa, I don't know if you know, but he started the first independent living center in New York in 1979.
Right. The Center for Independence of the Disabled, New York. Right?
Exactly, Blaze. Exactly. So I didn't get that job, but it's fine. He got the job. Then I applied for another job at the Capital District Center, CDCI, Capital District Center for Independence, which was one of the original centers in New York. And I applied for the job that Denise Figueroa ended up getting. So I didn't get that job either. And Denise got that job. And then a position came open for the Client Assistance Coordinator, which is a program to defend people when the vocational rehabilitation system does not work as well as supposed to, or you feel that you are not being treated correctly, all those things. So Denise hired me, and that's when it all began.
Third time's the charm. That's the way that worked for you.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. And you talked about, just some of the injustices in general, which of all places started at watching a woman give birth, which is
I know, right?
Fascinating.
I know, exactly. That's what I said. Some things they don't seem to connect, and yet they do.
Right. So some of the stuff that you had to do initially, things like discrimination, or if people weren't getting the necessary technology they needed, that's where you came in and helped out, right?
Exactly. If you know anything about the vocational rehabilitation established within the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 as amended, sorry for all that. But so the vocational rehabilitation program supposed to, and I say it that way because it doesn't quite work that way, but it's supposed to function toward training people with disabilities to maximize their ability to become employed. And once all that training or whatever it is that is required to assist them to get to a certain level, then to assist them to actually get a job. That's what they're supposed to be doing. The Client Assistance Program was a program that was developed because for whatever the reason, in our system, when we design something that's supposed to help somebody, it's never really designed to truly help somebody. So then you need another program to advocate for that person, against the very program that was designed to supposedly help them, to make sure that program helps them, if that made any sense. So the Client Assistance Program was born. to advocate for people within the vocational rehabilitation system to ensure as much as possible that all those services that they were entitled to or that the rehab act says that they should be receiving, that they actually receive it.
Right. And that helped you develop all sorts of relationships with legislators, people that you still know to this day. Like Paul Tonko is one that I think of from the many stories that we've talked about when he was an assemblyman, now a congressman, and Neil Breslin here in the Albany area, a longtime U.S. senator. So talk about how that sort of bridged your way into more of the systemic advocacy.
I'll begin with Senator Breslin because Senator Breslin and I have a very interesting sort of track as we move forward. I knew him before he was in the legislature. He was a hearing officer that the Vocational Rehabilitation Agency would contract with in order to deal with fair hearings. That's the way the system was set up. So in other words, as a client assistance program coordinator, what I would do is help people to ensure that they get the services, like I said before. Now, if it didn't work, we would go to an administrative review. They had these process that you have to go through to make your defense or make your argument. So the administrative process is the very first step of something very official. And that's usually something you just meet with the agency, with the consumer, and you discuss with the agency, what's the problem or the issue from the point of view of the consumer, because it's their issue, not mine. And so we try to work things out. If they don't work out, then we push for a fair hearing. A fair hearing, with the word fair, meaning that somebody else then acts as the judge. That's when they would hire somebody like Neil Breslin. So I knew him then. He was my hearing officer for a few cases, actually. Then he became senator, and we continued a good relationship. And he's actually written for me 2 proclamations. The first one was for my wife's and I 35th anniversary. And I remember I was in his office and he said something about doing this proclamation. And I was thinking to myself, what is the point of that? What? So I said to him, sir, what's the point of this proclamation? Why are you doing this? He goes, because I can. That was his response. Because I can, and therefore I will. I'm like, oh, okay. So that was the first proclamation from him. And then I got another one from him when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame, New York State Independent Living Council Disability Rights Hall of Fame in 2018.
Right. You were in the inaugural class with the late Pat Figueroa. Oh my gosh, let's see who
Michael
else was
Peluso.
Michael Peluso, the late Michael Peluso, who once asked me on a CDTA bus if I ever saw Daredevil, and it was a very long ride, and it made it all the more entertaining because if you knew Michael Peluso, and I'm going to do my best to do the voice, he just goes, "So Blaze, did you ever see Daredevil?"
That is good. That is good.
Yeah, may he rest in peace. Doug Uziak from the Western New York Independent Living Center, who just retired last year. I'm trying to remember the rest of that class off the top of my head.
Marilyn Saviola.
That's right.
From, she was I don't remember what number director of Sydney, but she was a director of the Sydney Center.
Yes.
The center we just talked about that Pat Figueroa started.
Right. Center for Independence of the Disabled New York. Yep. I forgot that's the role that she had because she actually was someone that I never knew. And I believe she unfortunately passed a couple of years ago, if my memory is correct.
Yeah, she was a very nice person. And Anne, I can't remember her last name. I think she was also in that list, but I'm not positive. I know that she worked for, I believe, the mayor's office in New York City. I think she was one of the very first, but I don't remember her last name. In any event.
Right. And what a phenomenal ceremony that was. Having been there I was in the room where it happened to make a Hamilton reference, and it was so cool to have your mom there and your whole family was there. Just such a phenomenal experience. That's truthfully the most memorable moments I have from that ceremony, was just seeing how truly proud of you your family was in that moment.
Yeah, for me, everything is always about my mother. Whatever awards I've ever received in my life, it's always really been for my mother. I've never done anything really for the most part for awards. I say for the most part because when I was in track and field in college, in high school, I did. I remember wanting to win this MVP trophy.
Well, I mean, that's high school. Who the hell doesn't?
And I did win it. But after that, no. But it was very nice to have my mother there. And it was very, very nice to have her come up to the stage and she spoke. And afterwards she goes, oh, I didn't know you were going to do that. You should have told me. I said, oh, right. So you would have been all nervous if I told you beforehand and you wouldn't have been able to say anything. This worked out perfectly. People told me they were crying afterwards after they heard it. So.
There wasn't a dry eye in the place.
So that to me was the most wonderful thing that my mother got to see that, unlike she did not get to see me when I got the Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Council of Independent Living. She had just died just the year
Right.
before that. So, and again, as I said, everything is for her that I've done is for her. But to get back to Paul Tonko, I knew Paul Tonko, as you said, in this assembly person. And I remember working with him very specifically on Timothy's Law, which is mental health parity. Mental health parity meaning that, supposedly at least, because I don't think it's ever really accomplished, but supposedly that the health insurance would treat mental health as they treat a physical ailment and continue to provide the assistance one requires instead of thinking that you're cured after 20 counseling sessions. In any event, so that I helped him with that. We became very good friends in that entire process. We even had a discussion one time for quite some time, just him and I in his office when he was an assembly person. He used to use this phrase, differently able. And I remember talking to him and I said, sorry, you need to stop using that phrase. And he looked at me like, what? Like, who says that to an assembly person? But if you know anything about me, that doesn't deter me. I will just tell you, especially if I consider you a friend. He was already by this time a sort of friend. And I said, yeah, you shouldn't be using it. And I just told him my logic as to why he shouldn't use that phrase. Because I said to him, it basically implies that there really isn't that much difference between people with disabilities and non-disabled people. I said, now, technically, on some other level, you would be correct on that. I said, but when you add in society and what society does, then it's a completely different story. You're in a luxury cruise ship, and we're in a rowboat with holes in it and one oar. So no, there's no differently abled. It's a very different, and it's a very negative different. And he's never used that word ever since. So, and then then I knew him when he became a congressperson. We've stayed connected, and that's how I know at least the two of them.
That's incredible. And then people like Phil Steck. This was when I started working at the Independent Living Center, seeing that relationship. And it's very, from what I'm hearing from you, very similar to the one that you have, or the ones that you have with Neil Breslin and Paul Tonko.
Yes, actually it is.
Only you could get away with going in and sitting in his chair.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. He actually also wrote me a proclamation when I got into the Hall of Fame, and him and Neil came to the ceremony. Actually, I thanked them both for being there at the ceremony. But I got to know Phil around the time when we were trying to, let's see, was it Hava or slightly after that? But it had to do with voting. And it had to do more specifically with local voting. Okay, we had already resolved HAVA. Yes, because I remember talking to him about HAVA, and he seemed to misunderstand that HAVA was federal and didn't apply to local government, but that's okay.
Right, HAVA meaning the Help America Vote Act, which was passed in 2002.
Thank you very much for that.
After the Al Gore presidential stuff.
Exactly. And it wasn't, and even though it was passed then, it doesn't even begin to start being implemented until after President Barack Obama was being elected.
It took that long?
Oh, God, yes. And even then, we were still fighting. While he was president, we're fighting for the whole issue of machines. Because we hadn't even gotten there yet. That's how slow things move. And we were fighting for that then. So then after that, when I got to know Phil Steck, we were dealing with local governments, which, of course, HAVA doesn't apply to. So therefore, local governments, because we don't live in a quote unquote wise society, contrary to what most people think. All right. So if we did, local government would at least say, oh my God, the federal government did that. We should do that too. No, they didn't do that. So they were still providing inaccessible tools for people to vote on, and which was in New York, the lever machine. The lever machine is something that practically don't know the state ever used, but New York did, and I believe Connecticut, but I'm not positive. And this machine it goes back to, I believe, 1908, and they stopped making parts for this machine. I don't know when, but the point is, by this century, they stopped making it, and we were still using it. That's how stupid we are. So local government was using it. We tried to make an argument and had legislation that we wanted passed that, would say that local governments needed to also be accessible. And so I remember talking to Phil Steck about this, and he goes, "Oh, I like the lever machine." I said, "Okay, here we go." He likes the lever machine. So I said to him, "Okay, so let me ask you this. If you have to choose between disenfranchising people or enfranchising people, which would you choose?" So I knew which one he would say, right? So he would want more people to vote.
Right.
Right. So I said, "Well, I'm glad that you said that, sir, because the method that you like keeps people out, keeps people from voting. You just told me you want to increase that." So I said, "We cannot do that, sir, if you're going to stick to the lever machine, which is inaccessible to a whole bunch of people." Then I said to him, "At a minimum," I said to him, "then you should fight for a machine to be right there also that is accessible. So you can keep your lever machine if you want to use it, but you then need to provide a machine that people with disabilities can use." That was the beginning of our relationship, because I don't think Phil Steck is used to somebody sort of changing his mind or helping, think differently in this sense, especially he was fairly new to legislature.
Right. Not the best at being challenged. That's for sure.
Yeah. And we became friends because he saw the logic of what I was saying, and he has been very supportive ever since.
Yeah. And especially around employment stuff. I think employment is sort of his wheelhouse, isn't it? As an attorney?
Yes, exactly. I think he was a civil rights or attorney. He was an attorney dealing with employment discrimination.
Right. Cliff Perez is with me here on the Blaze and Access podcast. You've taught me, and among many others, but it's so much easier for me to be the example here of some of the lessons around advocacy that you just frankly don't get from other people. So as we're dealing with all the crap that we are, both on the state level here in New York and federally, just boil it down to some of the essential keys that you see to being an effective advocate?
Loaded question. Okay. First, let me just begin by saying, and you at least know this because you know me personally, that I don't think the way most other people think, and I don't do the advocacy in the way that other people do it, or even when they provide training, the way that they would provide training. My way of doing advocacy is more about developing a relationship with the person I'm trying to influence. It is my opinion the best way to influence anybody is somebody that you know and that they know you. I could be wrong, but in my mind, I believe that it is much more difficult to have a stranger convince you of something than it is a friend to convince you of something, somebody you trust. So therefore, I center my advocacy on that. I center my advocacy on getting to know the people that have the kind of power that I don't have, that I need then to influence them, use them. And I know that word sounds negative, but that's essentially what it comes down to.
Right. It's leveraging that relationship.
Exactly. Thank you for that word. And you use whatever tools you can. And only with that kind of relationship that can you then push through with your ideas, and they're going to be a lot more receptive. Doesn't mean that they'll agree with you. As I already said before about agreeing, or maybe I was just talking to Blaze, about people just agreeing with me, which, is not common. So, but I'm good at influencing people because I'm good at putting arguments together, and I'm very logical. And I've heard, at least from many other people, so it's not coming just from me, that it's very difficult to argue against me. So, and I always tell people, well, that's kind of the way I plan it. How can you get your way if you make it easy for people to argue against you? So,
right. Well, it is difficult to argue with you. That's why I've only tried to do it once or twice.
So at the federal level, as you were saying, all this, I think the very first thing people need to really do, which I find that many people have a very difficult time doing, is first and foremost, you need to really stop worrying about all this stuff that is happening. I know that sounds so counterproductive, like, whoa, wait, you're an advocate. And you're like, I'm saying don't worry about it, because if you can't do something about something, then worrying about it is a waste of time, a waste of resource, and it's going to make you ill. If you're going to worry about something, then do something about it. Right? So if you have some issue with what's going on at the federal level or at the state level, then get off the couch and do something. Even if it's phone calls, that's doing something. You don't have to get out there and get arrested. That's an extreme. That option is also available, but you don't have to. There are many other things in between you can do. Even just going to the legislature and just talking to your legislators about how you feel about things is an important thing and a powerful thing to do. And always remember that whenever you talk to a legislator, whenever you are in the room with a legislator, in my opinion, who is the most important person in that room? Like most people would say the legislator, and I would tell you no. The most important person in that room is you, because they scheduled an appointment for you, and you're there to try to influence them. They shouldn't be influencing you. You're there to influence. So the most important person in that room is you. And anytime you go do advocacy, that's the way you should see yourself. You're the important person here, not necessarily the person you're talking to. But at the same time, you can't forget the reason you're talking to this person is because this person possesses certain power tools that you do not, and you need to get them to use those tools to do what you want them to do. How's that?
Well, I mean, that's perfect. And one of the quick stories I want to get to before, and gosh, we could sit here and talk about this for 3 hours and not cover everything. Maybe one day I'll get paid to have a radio show, and I just need you to come in with me all the time.
There you go.
You can co-host with me, and we just banter about this stuff. A man can dream, right? But anyhow, 2017, when there were the big Medicaid cuts that were proposed, and you somehow talked your way out of getting arrested while you were being dragged out of Mitch McConnell's office.
No, I talked my way out of being arrested.
Right. Weren't you being dragged out too at the same time?
Well, no, I wasn't. I wasn't dragged out. I've never been dragged out of any place, but I was calmly escorted out by the Capitol Police. And what was cool was that while we were walking, I was one of the very first, if not the very first person they took out. And there were all these cameras all along the side of the wall. It was incredible. It was the kind of thing you sometimes see in a movie or when you're watching a show about news and you see all these cameras. I swear that's the way it was. I looked over to my left, I remember, and there were all these cameras and people, So I'm having a calm conversation with this police person about. So I thought we lived in a democracy and that we were allowed to go and tell our legislators how we feel about things. Isn't that what the law is? And he goes, well, not when you obstruct the function of the office. I'm like, oh, okay. So we were just having this discussion and it was caught on camera. Now, get this. This is the real weird thing that I didn't know until I came home. I have some friends of mine that have people from all over. Friends of mine have some friends of theirs in London who saw this and talked to them about that because they knew me. And then my brother-in-law, who was working in the Marshall Islands, saw this. That's how big this was. And then when I got back to Albany, I was interviewed by Liz Benjamin.
Thank you. Then with Capital Tonight, now she's part of a big public relations firm.
In fact, and she's the one who did the first Hall of Fame thing that I was inducted. She was the one doing the MC that night.
That's right.
Yeah. So she had interviewed me on TV about that whole thing when we were taken out of McConnell's office and the whole issue that was happening with Medicaid and all the cuts, kind of similar to what's happening now, but now it's gone into law where back then it was getting to, and it didn't get there, but now it unfortunately got there.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of the future of the disability rights movement, Cliff Perez, how do we preserve the future of it? Because I think we both know that the same sort of fight spirit isn't quite there since the ADA passed. I mean, there's the people of my generation. Yes, we advocate, but we didn't have to fight for all the stuff that you and others had to fight for.
That does make things at least different because for what we would call post-ADA folks such as yourself, you grew up with this access that we fought for. Granted, there's still a lot to go.
Sure, no doubt.
But it sure as heck is gone. And I sometimes think people forget this. We have gone a long way from where we were. A long way. And the ADA did a lot to do that. And unfortunately, when you get something you've been fighting for a long time and you get it, unfortunately, you get a sense of complacency. Now, and the weird thing about that, of course, is on the one hand, well, you kind of should. Yeah, you fought for this and you should feel happy about it. But the unfortunate part about it is that complacency sometimes settles in a little too much. All the injustices, we haven't gotten rid of it all. And unfortunately, because you don't get rid of it all and you don't get the real deep root of all this, which is the way people feel deep inside. Just because you pass legislation, that's not abolished. So if there's a little hole in the sheet, if you will, for that stuff to start coming back through, it will start coming through. And we're at a point where it's coming through now. So there's a lot of things that we have fought for that we're losing little by little nuggets. We're not aware that we're going to lose a lot more because they're doing it little by little. So you don't take notice of it. It doesn't set in as much as if there's big pieces. It's kind of like what I've talked about, how you make change. You actually should make change by doing it little by little, not big. Well, they're doing that in reverse.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people with disabilities are not seeing this. And I think, unfortunately, too, for independent living, to be more specific to your question, independent living started at a time when Ed Roberts, when they asked, the classic thing is when they asked Ed Roberts, what is the meaning of independent living? What should it be doing? His response was advocacy, and then more advocacy. I unfortunately don't think that's happening anymore. I think the advocacy part is dying. I think that independent living centers are caught up in a very turbulent, unsympathetic system that concentrates more on the idea of whether or not you can afford to provide a service or not. And so independent living centers are forced to go toward the direction of money because we live in a capitalist system and that's not avoidable. So unfortunately now, by seeking the dollars, that also limits your advocacy because too many programs now say, well, if you're going to take our money, you can't advocate against us. And I think more and more that is happening in order for independent living centers to survive. I think it's wonderful that in the state of New York, we decided to use Part B money of the Rehabilitation Act to develop this statewide systems advocacy program, of which I'm a part of, that addresses many of the advocacy issues that independent living centers were meant to address all along. And I hope that we keep doing that. I also hope that independent living centers start considering going into the future of reaching out more to parents, because I know our history with parents, and believe me, I've done workshops on the history of people with disabilities, and I know exactly the whole issue about how parents were and why we made the decision we made. But that's all in the past, and we need to move forward. And if we want to attract the youth, then we need to attract the parents because they come together, whether we like it or not. And if we're going to make a separation between the two of them as they become adults, then we at least need to begin at the level where they're together. And that is reaching out to parents and try to get parents to work more with independent living and try to get independent living's philosophy to influence the parents, kind of like what I have done with some of the social work interns or human service interns I've had over the years. I have influenced them so that they now have become disability right advocates.
Right. And what I think we tend to forget sometimes is, hey, parents talk. Parents talk a lot.
And they're powerful.
Yes.
They're very powerful. In fact, the perfect example of power, look at DD. The whole developmental disability whole thing really is about parents. And look how powerful they are.
Right. Yeah. And we need to, at least in my opinion, we need to really work with the DD folks, not against them, because there are a lot of, I think, more commonalities than people realize in terms of the access and injustices that we face. It's just a shame that money is what drives the wedge.
Exactly. We all should work together. First of all, people with disabilities as a whole should work together, which is, that's not happening. And I think that's a very intentional part of the system we live in. It intentionally does this so that we don't unite and overthrow them, if you will, to be at the extreme. But if nothing else, people with disabilities, and if obviously the way I work and what I've been doing, right. And I've been doing exactly the opposite of that. I've been trying to build coalitions. I've been working now with other disability organizations such as Spina Bifida and the Epilepsy Foundation. And I've always worked the American Council of the Blind. And I've even tried to work with the National Federation of the Blind as well, because in order for us to be effective, and especially the way things are going as we move forward into the future, we need to work together. And we need to stop all this bickering and all this nonsense about power struggles and who should be in charge. That's just a waste of time and resources. We need to work together. And it doesn't matter what your disability, whether it's DD, whether it's a brain injury, whether you have a learning disability, whether you have misophonia. You probably don't know what that one is, but it's a disability or whatever it is.
It's an auditory processing disability where you're triggered by certain sounds.
Right.
Just the short, sweet explanation of it.
And we just need to work together. And as I said, bring in parents, because parents care. They may not care in the way that we think, because they have this paternalism stuff. But you know what? They can be educated too. And I think we're in a new generation where people are more open-minded and they've been more exposed to people with disabilities in a more positive way than in the past, where they were the ones doing the injustice to people against people with disabilities. That has been changing. Just like the fact that people are living longer and they're acquiring disabilities just because they're living longer. And then there are people with disabilities who themselves are living longer. That's the direction we're going. We need to make society a lot more accessible, if nothing else, because we're living longer and we're going to need it.
Right. Which is why you're going to make 130.
Exactly.
And being a parent now, I see that needle of acceptance moving the way it needs to. And I'm in that age. So it really is a golden opportunity. Cliff, I really wish we had more time. I'm always grateful for your time, your friendship, your mentorship, everything you do. And thanks again for doing this with me. We got to do one of these again here soon. Maybe in the summertime, we'll sit out in the deck and we'll have coffee or drink and just shoot the crap about the state of disability rights.
Sounds awesome. And it's been a real pleasure. And it's always a real pleasure speaking with you and just talking about these important issues that I believe in very strongly.
2 quick corrections before wrapping up the show. Number 1, I started working at the Independent Living Center of the Hudson Valley in September of 2014, just after graduating college. I started working for the New York Association on Independent Living in September of 2022. The second correction is I said Neil Breslin was a U.S. Senator. He was a New York State Senator who represented the Capital Region. This was the third part of our Black History Month series with Cliff Perez, Systems Advocate at the Independent Living Center of the Hudson Valley. The Blazing Access podcast is a Blazing Shows production and is not affiliated with any disability rights organization. The views expressed here on the show are solely those of the host and the guest. The show is hosted and produced by me, Blaze Bryant. The music you heard on today's show is by Andre Lewis, who is blind. What did you think about this episode? Let me know on Facebook at Blazing Shows. That's BLAISIN Shows. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe, share, and support the show if you can on our website at blazingshows.com. Transcripts are automatically generated and are not perfect, but they will give you a baseline sense as to what was said here on the show. Tune in next time for another great episode of the Blazing Access podcast, amplifying disability perspective one story at a time. Have a great day.